Until it fills up. Hey there guys, it is an absolutely gorgeous day here in southern Arizona at the beginnings of our monsoon season. I got a little bit of cloud cover, the temps are in the low 80s, and by Arizona standards that is about as good as you can ask for, being that it is late June. And couple that with the fact that I just got done cleaning out my chicken coop, which I do 2 to 3 times a year, which means it is clean and tidy for video work. I figured this would be a perfect opportunity to talk about the act of keeping chickens being the gateway drug to self-reliant living. It is the one project that I have recommended more than any others for people who are kind of wanting to delve into the homesteady kind of self-reliant field. Just that act of getting chickens, building the coop, caring for them, setting up the food and water systems will provide you knowledge and skills that I believe will make you a more well-rounded and self-reliant person. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to go through each one of my little things that I wrote on a list and talk about how I think it relates to you being a more self-reliant person. So the first thing on my list, as you very well might have expected, has to do with building the coop itself. It's arguably the first thing most folks think about after deciding to get chickens is, what kind of coop am I going to build and what is it going to look like? Is it going to be really basic and simple, or am I going to make it a little more extravagant and cute? Doesn't really matter, but it's the process of building the coop yourself that is going to expose you to various trade skills that you may or may not have been exposed to before, as well as learning the basic fundamentals of construction, such as leveling a foundation, putting up walls and making sure they are plumb and square. You'll be building doors and hanging the doors, and you'll have to make sure there's a threshold to be able to keep the weather out, installing windows and egg boxes, as well as maybe insulation or ventilation to make sure the coop is adequately cooled or warmed depending on where you live, and on up to the roof. And the whole process of doing this in a self-reliance aspect is that you are going to gain some skills that will give you the confidence that when something does happen with your house and there's a repair that needs to be made, you're going to have potentially extra tools from the build of the coop, but also the confidence and the skills to be able to, instead of calling a guy, tackling that repair yourself. And that translates even to, say you had a socket set to be able to assemble some stuff for the water or feeder or something like that. Well, maybe you start changing the oil on your vehicle yourself and doing some basic auto repair maintenance. You're going to be a person who's more capable and less likely to have to call a guy every time you need something done. The next item on my list is site design and location analysis. And I know that may sound a little strange with regard to the topic of this video, but hear me out. I think it'll make sense in just a few moments. So behind me, you will notice my coop sitting right there. And the reason it is placed there was for a specific reason. Number one, this is the leeward side of the hill which my house is located on. So this coop, as well as our garden and where our goats are, all are protected somewhat from the wind, the prevailing winds. But additionally, I placed the coop there for another reason, and that is because on the western side, I have a nice big mesquite tree, and on the eastern side, I also have a nice big mesquite tree. So during our hot time of year, where the sun comes up directly overhead, this coop is almost completely in the shade for the entire day. But you'll notice there's nothing on this side, which is the southern aspect. So in the wintertime, when the sun is low in the sky, it can warm up the coop. Not that we get that cold here, but it does provide some additional warmth for the coop during the winter months. And with relation to the self-reliance value of this aspect of the chicken coop keeping chickens process, This translates into how you look at everything in life. Whether or not you're moving to a new town, into a new house, where do you want your home located? Is it located right off of a freeway? Or is it at the end of a dead-end street, whereas if somebody ran the stop sign, they're going to go through your living room? Or are you in an area that is prone to floods? Or maybe you have raw land and you're going to build on that land, and maybe one aspect of the property has specific advantages. I don't know what those would be, but it just gets you into that mindset of thinking, not just for, oh, that's a great location to put it, but what are the additional advantages that you can get it from specifically locating it in one area versus another. Now, probably the second most common thing that folks will think about behind building the chicken coop is in what kinds of food systems are they going to set up for their chickens, meaning how are they going to store the food and deliver the food to the chickens in a manner that is weatherproof, rodent proof, and delivers some degree of efficiency, meaning you're not just throwing the feed on the ground to get kicked around, pooped in, and otherwise wasted. And are you going to offer an alternative source of nutrition for the chickens, such as letting them free range for insects or giving them kitchen scraps or clippings from the garden? For us personally, I store feed in one of our goat barns, but I also store it in this little DIY chicken feeder tower that has a little dispenser on the bottom that we can use to fill up our chicken feeder. And that chicken feeder is located in the chicken run, and it holds probably 3 days, maybe 4 days worth of feed. It's got a little measuring stick. And we also allow our chickens to free range just about every day, so long as our dog is out to protect them. And they get tons of insects and different things like that. And depending on the time of year, like say in monsoon season, there's so many insects that they almost don't even touch the chicken feed, which takes a huge burden off of how much feed we have to feed them. But they also get kitchen scraps and clippings from the garden in that manner. And the way this translates in my thinking to the self-reliance aspect is, if you're thinking about your chicken food system in that way, you're going to be more likely to think about your own pantry. Do you store any extra food? Do you have a can rotator? Do you ever forage for maybe wild edibles that might be in your area? Specifically here we have prickly pear cactus, which offer the paddles that you can eat, as well as the prickly pear fruit. And then also, are there any other ways you can attain food? For us personally, we hunt, so we can attain wild meat, which I think is superior to every store meat that you could possibly buy. And anyway, so I think it just translates into you having a broader understanding of where your food comes from, and you're not always reliant on going to the store for every single calorie that you're going to consume. Although I happily go to restaurants somewhat regularly, so I definitely don't want to completely cut myself off, but I do think thinking about your food systems will make you a more resilient person if times get tough, or even if they don't. And with food, the next thing you absolutely have to have is a watering system, which can be as simple as a 1 or 2 gallon waterer from a feed store, which will work for a time. You take the lid off, fill it up, and then invert it, and there's a little trough for them to drink from. But the weakness of something like that is it's a very limited capacity, and you're going to have to come check it every day or every other day at minimum. I much prefer having a 55-gallon drum that's connected to some waterer cups, because it gives me a longevity and peace of mind that the chickens are not going to be without water for long periods of time, especially if you go out of town for a couple of days or somebody's watching your house. Well, it's just one less thing that can potentially be forgotten about. And if you can believe it or not, I have combined mine with a rainwater harvesting system. You can see I have a pipe going from both gutters of the chicken coop, and also collecting from a shade structure over the chicken run, and all that is piped into this blue barrel, goes through a screened inlet, and ultimately supplies my chicken waterer cups. And that is an entire system that, so long as we're getting rain and it doesn't get clogged through what is coming in through the inlet, can kind of go on in perpetuity. I mean, eventually I would have to probably clean out some algae, but it would go for months and months and months. And with the self-reliance value aspect, doing something like this on a small scale provides you the opportunity to set up a rainwater harvesting system on a small scale, learn how to elevate and pipe and run water to waterers, and that translates to what you keep in your pantry. If you have extra water containers, maybe an emergency water container in the garage, and if you decide to ever set up a system on your house to collect rainwater, because let's face it, the municipal systems are prone to failure, and there will probably be a time that you turn on the tap and no water comes out, and it would be very useful for you to know another way to collect water. Moving on from rainwater, the next topic I want to cover is solar, and this will be a quick one because I do not have solar on this current version of my chicken coop, but I want to cover it because I did have it on the previous version of the coop that stood in the exact same spot, and that was just a simple 15-watt panel that went to a charge controller that powered a 12-volt deep cycle battery, and that battery in turn was able to power an interior light bulb and an electric fence that went around the base of the coop run. But because of a hailstorm that damaged the panel, and once the battery went bad, when I built this new coop, I just opted not to install it yet. I was meant to, but I just didn't end up getting around to it. But I do think it is something worth looking into, and for the self-reliance value aspect, doing solar on this small scale like a chicken coop will allow you to kind of experiment and learn the basics of having a charge controller and a deep cycle battery, and you know, orienting the solar panel, running the wires, and kind of just learning the basics of 12-volt electricity. And anyway, so that's why I'm including it, and you'll just have more information in case you ever wanted to put one on a shop or a shed, or install solar panels on your house. Another important consideration when it comes to keeping chickens, or really any animal for that matter, is that you are going to be their primary source of health and wellness, meaning you are going to have to keep an eye on those animals and check to see if they have anything ailing them. Commonly for chickens, they can have issues with mites or fungal infections, although out here in our dry environment, I have not had really issues with those, but I know they are common. And sometimes it'll be appropriate for you to contact your veterinarian or go to a feed store and get a remedy like Mitex. But it's also important to remember that sometimes you can treat ailments with naturopathic or homeopathic remedies, teas and salves. And my wife has had a lot of success treating our goats, and when Marley had her Mustang on the Tip Challenge program, that she was able to treat at home without having to contact a vet or go to an outside source for remedy. And the way that relates, in my thinking, to kind of the self-reliance value is that you are less likely to always seek out outside help for simple things that can be treated at home. You're not going to be that person that is running to the ER for a tummy ache when it could have been just an issue that you could treat at home. Obviously, there's always going to be an appropriate time for outside interventions, but if you're trying to live a more self-reliant life, anything you can do to bolster your knowledge at home and your capabilities, I think is better and will make you a healthier, more resilient person. And definitely one of the lesser thought of aspects to getting chickens and building a chicken coop is planning a way to clean that coop, because there are various benefits, but first and foremost, the cleaner the coop, the less issues you're going to have with your chickens in regard to getting mites or anything like that. I generally don't have any problems with my chickens, but I also live in a very dry environment and we tend to not have issues like that. But for my coop, I added a little clean out door on the bottom, and I have vinyl flooring where I can just push all of the stuff out into a barrel like this. This is what I got from when I cleaned it a week or so ago. And I just put bedding there in the form of straw or hay. And then all of this will get in this tub and my wheelbarrow I usually bring over here. And then it'll get put in a compost pile or one of my compost tumblers. And the self-reliance aspect of that is that you are creating compost that you can garden with and create more food with. And with regard to the security aspect of keeping chickens, that is something that will heavily depend on where you live and what types of predators your chickens are likely to face. But in general, a solid wire barrier like hardware cloth or chicken wire that goes into the ground and extends out and is installed properly is going to suffice for most folks. But there are all other alternatives, such as electric fencing, like I mentioned on my first coop I had, but also motion lights. I've heard of even people using sprinklers to come on based on motion to thwart off raccoons or bobcats. But it will get you thinking about security in the broader context, and on that self-reliance value, if you are able to think about threat assessment for your chickens, you are also going to look at your home in a different manner. You're going to maybe identify a bush that's in front of your kid's window that somebody could hide behind, and maybe you want to trim that thing or remove it. But it will also apply to when you are parking in a parking lot, or advising your wife or kids when they are parking in a parking lot to not park in dark areas, to be in a lighted area, and just be overall more aware of your surroundings. And I could really go for probably an hour on this topic, but at least hopefully that touches the surface on how this can translate into being a little more security minded and aware. And without a doubt, one of the best aspects to having chickens is the egg box, or wherever you build for them to feel safe and lay eggs, because ultimately that is where you are going to reap the rewards of their labor and be able to enjoy nice fresh eggs. There's so many options out there. People build nesting boxes with 5-gallon buckets or milk crates or all sorts of ideas. I've gone with this outside box because I just kind of like the look of it. It's got a flip up lid as well as a flip down door that has a little egg trough here, so I can set eggs in there as I'm collecting them. They won't roll out. And I also added the option for our hot times to have a flip up block of wood that raises the roof to allow a little bit of extra ventilation. But anyway, you can really be creative with an egg box and find out what works for you. And the self-reliance aspect is in the fact that you can have baby chicks if you simply have a rooster to fertilize the chickens. And the last thing I had on my list has to do with the educational opportunities that'll be available to your kids from the act of keeping chickens. With everything that I've mentioned so far, hopefully you are going to involve your kids in that, from the building the coop to all of the other aspects. But it will also be an opportunity for them to learn some basic discipline and responsibility in that the chickens are going to need to be fed and watered, and the eggs are going to need to be collected and washed. And if they want to venture into 4-H, they can learn a lot more about the breeds and animal husbandry and a lot of other aspects of chickens. And that's just the gateway into other animals. But also it will provide them the opportunity to learn the basics of economics in the form of entrepreneurship. If they decide to sell the eggs to neighbors, they'll have to learn how to factor in the cost of feed versus their labor and what they want to sell the eggs for. And they will quickly have a better grasp of supply and demand than probably most adults. and ultimately that will translate into them growing up to be more capable, well-rounded, self-reliant adults. Alright, well I think that's going to do it for this video. As you can tell, I am a very strong believer in chickens as one of the do-all projects that will give you far more than just eggs. And hopefully you found the information informative. I know I probably yapped for a long time, but truth be told, I could have talked probably for an hour on each one of those facets, getting into the details, but I tried to keep it as short as I could. And also on another note, because this video has focused so much on self-reliance and that aspect of life, if you are into that, you have inevitably seen the world for what it is, and you may be concerned about a lot of the same things that I am concerned about, like inflation and what I view as the purposeful devaluation of the dollar. And I want to introduce you to a company that you will hear me talk about in future videos that I am partnering with. It is ITM Trading. They are a precious metals dealer that can help people with precious metals investment strategies, specifically for gold and silver, because, you know, of the last several thousand years of recorded history, gold and silver are the only commodities that have always maintained their value, whereas fiat currencies come and go. Gold and silver always remains. So anyway, if you are interested, I will put a link down below in the comments and in the description to a little landing page. You'll see a picture of me, and if that's something of interest to you, check it out. As for the next video coming up, that will probably be back to the truck camper. And anyway, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button for more content like this, and I will see you on the next one. God bless.